Hey Dan, shed. A nice one, it feels like. Taking that home. As you guys can see, there's some great content coming up in this video. In this video, you're gonna see just how I found this shed and just how Dan led me to the spot that this buck was dropping its antlers, hanging out in the early season, as well as a rut. So, in other words, you're gonna find spots where Dan gets on big bucks all year in this video. You're gonna see how he discovered them, what he's looking for when he's breaking down a marsh, how he speed scouts it, and then when he identifies the bed where he thinks they should be, he's going to track the trail back, set up his tree, and make a plan to kill that deer, and tell you what time of year he would plan and why to kill that deer. It's extremely valuable information if you want to start killing bucks like Dan does year in and year out. Which, this one, I'll give you guys a clue, you've already seen before, and it's in a lot of trouble next year. This is actually a 2-year-old shed. So, stick around, you're going to see some great content, and maybe you'll learn a thing or two on the way.
So you get some bullets will hit, right?
Hunted a little bit up around Quincy, Illinois. The Mount Sterling State Park up there, and then I hunt about an hour and a half south of Troy, Illinois. There's not a lot of public.
Listen, 15 minutes north here in Oconomowoc, so it needs
From Van Dyne, Wisconsin.
I'm from northern New Hampshire.
I drag, I cook, I do whatever the hot shots do. No, I've been hunting. Our family's from northern Maine, and that's part of our life.
From Nourishment, Wisconsin.
Nourishment, Wisconsin also.
Most people still end up, you know, if you go through that woods, you'll find a little patch of thick stuff, and there'll be a scrape or a rub on a tree like this, and there'll be 3 tree stands around it, you know. But you got to learn how to look past that stuff and look at the terrain, read the terrain, and know where those bucks are coming from. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go and speed scout through an area that I hunt quite frequently. What really drives the workshop is the questions. You stop, feel free to ask anything. If you're thinking something, or if you're thinking something that just doesn't seem right to you, ask. There's probably other people thinking the same thing. It's a fun time. Spot is right next to the parking lot. When I first started hunting here about 30 years ago, these trees weren't like this. You can see the parking lot. And it's changed a little over time. But I've killed some really big bucks right here. Kind of overlooked right next to the road. The buck that was dubbed the 400-pound slob was killed out of that willow tree right there. People look at this as an axis, so it's kind of overlooked. Nowadays with the onyx and stuff, people see this a little more than they used to, but still it gets overlooked. The only person I ever ran into hunting here turned out to be somebody that came to the workshops. Otherwise I've always had this to myself. I've done most of my hunting out of that willow tree, but more often now I set back a little further because I get spotted there a lot, and I like to sit over by that deadfall or a pine tree there with cedar tree. There's a little hole in there. But I like to be right here mostly because they come up in here. You can see where they stage, where all the rubs are. This is the first year in a long time that those rubs aren't just ripped up. But I do know that 2 of the bucks that I was hunting right here got killed across the street this year, early in the season. So that's probably why there ain't as many rubs right here. The bucks would bed in the marsh there, and would bed under the trees, and a lot of them would come out of that pile of brush right over there, which is only what 40 yards or so from the access trail where everybody walks. And that trail gets walked every single day. As you can see, there's a car there today that's going to be walking around. And a lot of the bigger animals came out from underneath the trees just inside of the dogwood on the private land. Like if you look at where that big tree is right over there, it's dead because it's an ash tree. But right at the base of that, stuff would always get up and come in. here about 15 minutes to closing, and then just kind of stage around and slip across the road into private crop fields and food plots and stuff. But this is kind of that great spot that's just overlooked, you know, right next to the parking lot, you know, that we always talk about, that just everybody walks past us and they don't think deer are this close, you know. You got any questions about this?
So the bedding out there, do you think that's like wind dependent, or is it kind of any time?
No, in these swamps like that, when you're out there, it's not really. It is to a micro degree. You see them shift their beds based on the wind, but they'll have beds under all those different trees in different ways, and there'll be ones they prefer for certain winds. And they'll actually, as the winds shift during the day, they'll get up and move over to different beds, but the shift is so small you couldn't get in between it. But they'll move around. Like if you're really elevated gun hunting or something, you'll see them get up and move on wind shifts and stuff. But it ain't like hill country where they'll be dependent on a certain ridge or something. In here they're more based on sound coming at them. I mean, you couldn't walk in there without slurping and sloshing and all that. And that is completely underwater, which is what put the bucks out there. But the trees grow out of solid ground, and at the base of those trees, there's like a dirt clump, and that's where the beds will be.
So seeing that's private, is there any hunting pressure on that side, or are they safe over there?
That's a great question.
Yes.
So when I first started hunting here, that farmer don't hunt, and this was a killer spot, and I saw big bucks here every year. But say 10 or 15 years ago, he started letting some relatives and friends hunt there who invite a ton of people, and they do like a 100-man drive every year. They only do it once, but they come right through this stuff and drive it to here, and they line this up with guys one day during gun season, and that one day has made a huge impact on what I see here. If I do see something now, it's usually just, you know, early season when it starts getting near gun, you don't see anything, because they learn over time, you know. And historically, like my trail cameras will show that the same bucks showing the same spots almost to the date, year after year. When you start putting pressure on that time frame, they move to someplace else, you know. Any other questions?
What's like your biggest clue here? Obviously, like, you know, like you want to check in, like, you know, like this could potentially be a decent spot. Would it like the clue be like all the rubs, and then that makes you like dive in deeper and trying to figure out, you know, where they're bedded and stuff like that? Or like, how do you, so say you come across a, you know, something like this, how do you know, if it's daylight, nighttime, if it's worth checking out?
Well, the first thing for me is I'm looking at this spot because on a map I'm going to see potential bedding out here. I'm going to see wetlands that have trees in it, and I'm going to see marsh that potentially holds deer, and I'm going to look a little closer. And if I get in here and there's trails coming out of that, and there's rubs on those trails where they're staging and stuff, that's going to tip me off right away. Now there are spots that I found like that look like they're dynamite, and you never kill a deer there, and eventually you give up. But I would be hunting there, you know, for sure. There is a possibility there's something further, but this has the layout for everything they need. They got the bedding right there. It's a spot where nobody's going. Usually pressure's real dependent on it. If they got good bedding, if there's pressure here, it might just stop the hunting, you know, cold. And there still might be rubs from deer passing through, but when you take away the pressure factor, the bucks will bed right here and move across. And actually, inside of this marsh here, we have better deer than the surrounding properties out there, because anytime there's pressure, it puts all the deer inside of the marsh. Because the private, even though it's managed and stuff for better bucks, they can hunt every inch of it because it's dry, and everybody's got hunters on their properties. And come gun season, they just push all the deer in here. It's actually better gun hunting in the marsh than there is on the private. When we pulled in here, when we went over the river over here, there's a building that was beside the river there. They have a hunting ranch here. I forget how many acres they have, and it's real high dollar. I think they charge 10 grand a membership to hunt there. And they manage for trophy bucks. I mean, the Roman legend lived on their land. I'd watch it all the time over there, and it would come over here for whatever reason to breed the does and rut. And I just patiently waited till he came over and stayed over. He'd come over at night, but when he finally came over and was staying over, then I shot him. Else?
Before this got so thick in here, like you said when you first started hunting in here, were they using this part differently than they do now?
Yeah, they glued to this canal a little more. Now they kind of go over and go through the parking lot a lot and stuff. But even then, I would watch from the tree. I saw deer walk through the parking lot. I could literally see the parking lot when I first started hunting it. Which now you look at it, you can hardly believe that. But it grows up fast.
You're just old.
You're just young.
Yeah, right.
Anything else?
One advantage to the spot dam that I think we forgot to mention yesterday is the traffic and the sound, how it can cover you when you're setting up.
That's true. It's a lot easier to get in here with using the traffic noise, you know. I don't know that it's a huge advantage here because deer are a little further back than I'd like. But in some places it's really a good thing to have that traffic and just move when the cars are going by, you know, when you get close.
In spots that I've timed up trains to try and do the final push with the stand.
Yeah, you'll find that some of my spots I'm within 50 yards of the deer, and in those cases you can't go in on a dead silent day. You have to have some sort of wind noise or car noise or something. Anything else?
Yeah. It's crazy how many, like, very impressive. You seen much for buck tracks? Because I've seen mostly does. Yeah.
But when guys come out here, they typically hunt right here. They get in here and cross that water, and they hunt right here because they see signs. Anybody know why this spot would hold a lot of deer? Because of the acorns. Because when you're in swamp, oaks are isolated. There's very few oaks. So when you get into a pile of oaks, you got like a bait pile, basically. So they're all coming to these oaks at a certain time of the year. So this is early season, a lot of deer come into this. And if you come out here early season, you'll see all these trees rubbed up. I see there's not many rubs here this year either. This year wasn't over there either. But I did come in here early season when I was hunting in the back and scouted my way back. And there was a trail camera right here, and it looked like I've been hunting here quite a bit, so that might have had something to do with it. But if you look, you'll see old rubs all over the place, historical ones. And those are important because you might hit a year like this when maybe there was no acorns dropping this year, right? It's kind of an every other thing year. You know, the oaks drop every other year, and then the bucks show up every other year, basically. So you might be on a spot that has old rubs, and you're thinking, and then the next year you're like, oh, it's got fresh rubs. I'm hunting here next year. And you come back next year and nothing shows up, right? Well, they're here when the acorns are dropping. Kind of where those dead ones are. The deer will be into there, in that high grass and little high spots bedding. And they're going to get up and come up here to feed. And this is where the last oak is. So I'm going to find some setup in here based on the wind. If we go like this today, I'm probably going to try and get to this side. And as far as I can, just in case there's a squirrel or something, like maybe in this tree on the back side of it here, aiming this way because of the angle. Maybe into this, that's pushing it a little bit. If I got a good enough wind, I could get in the oak. That's got a lot of cover. And if it was blowing, you know, that way, I'd get over to that side. But I would, you know, I come in here based on the west wind's going to blow straight down, which is why they're trying to bed in here. But what I really want to get across to you is how close I am to this deer. And if you're over where those guys are hunting, those deer aren't getting there till dark. If they're shooting something, they're probably shooting deer and a half old buck. Anything with any kind of age to it, this is about where they're going to get in daylight. And in a lot of these setups like this, when I do shoot a mature buck, I'm shooting it this close, and I'm shooting it at close time. And a lot of times, those deer will get up an hour before dark or whatever, and they'll literally walk around in there and pace around and move around and eat on the grass and stuff before they finally get over there, and I'll shoot them at frozen time. Because they're just kind of like taking their time about getting over there, especially if they know there's danger there. There's people coming there in the path, you know. Every now and then you'll get a big deer will get up and come by you in 2 hours before dark. But that's not the norm. You got to hunt them all like they're paranoid, or you won't have the success. So pushing that limit is what's killing them. You know, getting this close. Not to mention, You get back there a little ways, and if you notice, there's a split in the trail, right? The further back you get, the more likely one can go to the right or to the left or whatever. Now you're narrowing down the trails too.
Is there much of an effect on thermals on a spot like this?
There can be. A lot of times the water in the marsh will pull, but it usually doesn't have a huge pull. You got to be pretty close to it. If I'm setting up right next to the water, like in that tree, it'll probably pull my thermal pull when it's cattail. But it's only when it's dead calm. Any kind of breeze, it won't do it. But you'll notice when it gets dead calm, if you drop milkweed, it'll pull to the water.
And I've been out, you see which way the wind's going, you get set up, and then like an hour later, it shifts on you. Do you normally, okay. I was gonna say, do you normally, would you switch spots or, and move?
If I had to, I would, yeah. I try to set up with that in mind in the first place, thinking about what the thermal's going to do, what the wind's going to do.
It does seem like the thermals have more of a pull, especially as it gets later in the day.
More hilly.
There is, but there's areas that are flat like this.
Yeah. Well, the flatlands don't have much thermal pull, but they have some. And it usually has to do with the water. Heated up, shallow, stagnant water. Especially in the warmer time of the year.
Yep.
Specific areas like this, like a point that has cattails around it, or an island that's surrounded by cattails, you typically see that the deer will favor walking edges like this, or will they come right up the middle of the high ground once they get out of the bed?
They do both. And every situation is different. When you get in here, you're going to see the trail, just like we just did. We walked up that trail. Even without the snow, you'd see that trail. And I know some of you guys got a little bit further behind me, but I was trying to point out all the historical rubs along it, so you can see where the bucks travel. And sometimes, I can think of an island where I've killed a lot of deer where there's 3 trails that come out, one up the middle, one on each side, and it's kind of wide, so it's got to be a pain. But that's just what you got to deal with sometimes. But you should be able to come in here and look at the sign and see how they're coming in and out.
Read the freshest sign and base their setup off of
Correct.
that.
And what you might find out too is that sometimes they walk up this and they're going into those oaks, and maybe in a different position, maybe there's some crops over here, and sometimes they come out and go that way, and you got to look at what they're doing right now, kind of thing. But if you see sign going 2 ways, you got to try to put that in your head. At one point in time they're going this way, and one point in time they're going that way. It's usually not that they're doing both randomly. They've got a destination in mind.
If it's a drier year and there's not as much water in these cattails, do you see them bedding more in random spots in the cattails, or still in those little tree island areas?
Yeah, maybe even deeper. Sometimes when it's drier, they go out even further.
You looking at the shed? No, almost. Oh.
We'll do the first now.
Yeah, right?
I have nothing more to say. Hey, can you move over? You're standing on something.
Right. You'd get it on video right now too, because I'm recording. I'd have to not post that.
John Gillis. I had to tell him to move so I could get up here where he was standing on.
Remember you saying that on the podcast? He was so frustrated. He's like, I can't understand how you're seeing all these sheds. Hate to do this to you, John.
There's the island right here. It used to be a lot better without all the ash shed. There's still a dogwood patch in there. There's a trail that comes out right here, and a trail that comes out right here. And I believe you can see those on your maps if you zoomed in. So what I'm doing here is trying to cover both of them. I'm trying to hit both of them. Where normally, in a normal situation, I'd come along an edge, find a trail going to an island, and set up right, to hit right there at 20 yards. In this aspect, I'm trying to hit both. I came back here once this year, and when I got here, I intended to hunt here early season. When these 2 oaks are dropping, or 3 oaks, I mean, when this is good, it's the best. Good action season, but that 2-week peak is again early season here. And that's quite a draw. But when I came in here early season this year, there was marks on this tree from somebody hunting it, and it was all padded down in the grass around it. So I kept going and I hunted someplace else. So I didn't hunt this year, but I've had a lot of really cool encounters here. If you go back about 20 years ago, I used to guide out here, and I had a client shoot a really big 8-pointer right here. Came from that island. I had a really big 8-pointer I was hunting about 5 years ago. That I was hunting the area down because I knew he was in here. I had him on trail camera. I knew some other people that had him on trail camera. I ran into people talking about him in the parking lot where they had interactions with him. And I started hunting down all the bedding areas in here and had a couple of confrontations with him. And one of them was right here. And he came in out right there and seemed to know I was here. Stayed in the brush and walked away. But I think he wasn't bedded all the way to the island. He was just inside the cattails, which is something that happens here. Sometimes they're just in there. They don't go all the way to the islands for whatever reason. Probably because they feel safe here. This really doesn't get very much pressure, as what you would think, being so close to the parking lot. Like I said, again, probably because the water goes over the boots. You know, most people aren't wearing waders out here. Or, you know, I used to back in the old days. I used to go out a lot right after a snowstorm and try to cut tracks, follow them back to the bedding area, and set up for them coming back out. And we had a snowstorm one time, and right where we turned into the woods, across that road is that access trail is a cornfield. And I was walking in, cutting tracks, and there was a real good buck track coming out of that cornfield going through here. And I tracked it right into here and went right up that trail into that island. And this is a long time ago, and I used to use a climber. I had a lone wolf climber, and I went up a poplar. I'm not sure if it's this one. There used to be one next to it that's fallen and dead. It's gone now. But I climbed way up, you know, facing the tree, and then when I turned around, I could see the buck bedded under that tree over there looking at me. And we sat there together, and I stared at it, and it stared at me until it was black, and then I finally got down, and it never moved. It just turned its head every now and then, but it watched me climb the tree. So that was a lesson about higher isn't always better. You know, out here, you can get up about 15, 20 feet pretty good, and those deer can't see you out of the cattail, because you get way up. I mean, they're just looking straight up at you. You know, you don't want to get too high. Any questions? So you got to put on a lot of miles to do this, right? And the main thing is, if you learn an area like this, you can, you know, learn all those spots. There's some big shows out there on camera, big in that area. You can costume that area. I mean, a lot of people hunt a swamp or something, or an A area. They might find a spot like this, and this is all they hunt. That's a mistake, because when you're on public land, there ain't always a big buck in that area or living in that area. You know, in a lot of cases, there can even be a big sign, and that deer don't live here. He comes here at night. You know, so you have to be able to judge that. You know, so floating around and having a lot of good spots and going after the deer that you know exist and are there at the time is always the best option. The reason I stopped at this point is I wanted to talk about the marsh a little bit. That, you know, the marsh is great for a guy starting out on flat land, because it really teaches you how to hunt. Where you can't see it on a swamp, you can't, you know, it's not as easy to see, but on a marsh, you can look out over the cattails and see things. So, I mean, you can look at these edges, you can see a point over there down into the marsh. Obviously, that's the spot I'd go into and look at. Look out here, it's a subtle, you know, this stuff, this thick stuff dumped into the marsh. I'd look at that. You see an island of trees out there, where it tapers out into there, I'd look at that. A young guy I know told me he put a camera there in the front and had a shooting buck open young better every day for 10 days straight. So I ran a camera the whole season this year down there, and we pulled it at the end of gun season, and I had a few run-ins with some deer down there. So it's kind of interesting. But I always looked at it as, when these rubs are open, that's an early season spot, first 2 weeks of the year, and I had a lot of action doing that. I've had some good hunts there that early 2 weeks. But based on that kid telling me what he saw during rut, it made me rethink it. And this year the camera showed that a rut it really picks up too. You know, and we had a 10-pointer that was just living down here. He wasn't the biggest buck I was after, but he was decent, and I went after him once or twice. When it got later in the year, he started bedding out on the far island, which you can see out there, and coming in. But he started out bedding on the island like they always do, you know, until the cover starts going away, or on this point, I mean. But this point, like I can just walk through here, never even really notice it. And the way I used to hunt in early season is I'd walk through here like everybody else. People go for walks around this island, walk the rim, right? They walk right through here through all these rubs. So I figured if people do it, you're used to it. So I'd come in and look at the rubs, and the rubs are open, and they're of good size, which anytime there was acorns dropping and it was early season, they'd be here. First weeks of the season, this would be tore up. So the only times I ever saw people hunt here, they'd be right here where the rubs were. They wouldn't be down at the bottom, they'd be hunting where the sign is. So this is a little point, I don't know if you've looked on your phone, but on the phone it's really obvious. But walking through here during the season, you hardly even notice it. I mean, it blends in with the leaf cover and everything else, you know, you just walk right past it. The guys use the phone to find it. So, I'm going to go in there, we're going to look at the beds, and what I'd like to do is go straight to the beds and then come back to my setup and show you right where they're bedding and right where I set up for them, and kind of give you a grasp on how close and how we sneak in there and that kind of thing. So, any questions before we go down there?
What type of cell cams do you like to use?
We've been using Exodus cameras. They're friends of ours, so we like using their equipment. It's a little pricey, but it's a small American company, and I just have something in me about supporting them.
And they came up with that
Rival.
supposed to be cheaper.
The rival camera they're coming up.
I get that and try it.
Just came.
Like 179.
Yep.
And they got a deal on it too. If you watched before the Echo, he's got a promotion up, so you can use that discount code for it.
I had to watch that show.
Yeah, right.
I didn't know you had a promotion.
There's a really weird guy that's on it all the time. He wears like cheeseburger cat sweatshirts and stuff.
Cheeseburger cat camel.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, let's walk down there. So when they do bed here, generally I find the bedding like right over in that corner. There's a buckthorn tree underneath that and around it, and off of the point here. There used to be a lot more off the point, then these trees started dying. Ash disease or whatever, and they don't bed on the point as much now. They shifted over here, at least the bigger stuff, but there's still some bedding on the point too. And you can tell where the beds are because that's all grass and cattails. There'll be a matted down round circle where they're laid, you know. So they're getting up right out of this stuff and then coming up the point, which is pretty common. They don't generally get up on a point and go out into the cattails unless they know you're there or something. They generally do come in, and this has oaks on it, so the early season I've had that really good hunt with the acorns. However, they can get up and they can eat right underneath this one without coming to you, you know, because you got oaks right near the point. So we'll get in there and walk around that point. I know we're going to be kind of spread out because of the number of guys, but I want you to look at the round circles and where the beds are. I'm expecting the better bedding to be underneath that dogwood. So kind of look for rubs, see what you see. This is kind of the areas where I start seeing beds in here. There used to be a little better tree cover, all these trees died. There's a nice bed right here that we're going to step in. On this side, this log here.
Got one right here. Lima bean shape.
So this is a good one right here. Usually if there's something here, this is where it's laying. It's usually the primary spot. So right underneath this tree here in the shade, right there. There's one rub here in the bed right back here. Right. You can see too, one thing that you'll notice about this rub is you got to ask yourself, why would a deer be in there? The only reason is because he's bedding in there. That he'd have a rub in that deep like that. So then when these deer leave these beds, here's another bed here. When they leave, this is generally, I'm walking the path that they come out of. So that's good to think about, because you want to look at how are those deer coming out, because that's how you can hunt them, right? So this time of the year when I'm looking at this stuff, I'm looking at this in a way of, okay, I'm going to come out of here and I'm going to find a setup. I'm going to go to a point where he can't hear me, he can't see me, he can't smell me. And that's where I'm going to set up as close as possible. I'm not expecting them to make it to where all those people walk on the edge of the swamp in daylight. So I'm kind of following them out of here right now. So this spot right here, where we set the camera up, me and Rick set it up in that tree right here, right up there and down here. And the reason we picked this spot is because this was the heavy buck trail in my opinion, because they're coming out in the evening. And last year that tree right there was built in this tree, and the tree behind you. And this is usually a big bump right here. And when we got here and set that camera up, what was it, August? A deer got up out of right here, which this was a tangle. There's a bed in there, and there's a hole in the grass. He got up and ran out of it. That tree's always got a really big bed underneath it. And I remember one time about 10 years ago, we took two groups out here, and they were 2 weeks apart, kind of like we got planned this year. And the first year, I took 30 guys there, and then took 30 guys there the next day, and then waited 2 weeks and went back, and there's a 6-point shed laying in that bed. Pretty cool. I see there's some beds right here. Yep. I actually don't think they're doe beds, I think they're buck beds, because of how they're laid out. You look at this one, you can see how he's laying here when the wind's doing what it's doing right now. And you see it's a fairly large bed. And if you look at the tracks coming in here, those are probably off of a 2-year-old buck, so that's probably what did this. I mean, it's not gigantic like a mature buck, but it's good size. So he's laying here when the wind's blowing this way, he's smelling behind him, and looking at the entrance, right? So at some point when the wind is going the other direction, he's over here. So when the wind's going like that, we're coming in over here. And then there's a brief bed there that's not really, nothing laid there for too long, because it's just barely melted. But
That's right. It's probably melted out a little bit, but pretty dang wide.
So this isn't normally where they bed, but I think they're bedding here because of the time of the year. They're just coming up out of the cattails and snow and stuff, and they get a little more lax for some reason at this time of the year.
How wide this is, Ken? It's a little melted out, but
I'm sure that's the same track that was going through the cattails.
yeah.
They can even put down those beds in the same day, because the wind might change during the day and then they move. And that can even be the same day, same buck. So this little thicket that grew in here, didn't used to be here years ago, is where they started bedding, like into those pockets and stuff, in this brush. And a lot of times when I walk onto the island, one will get up and run off. A few years back, I came onto the island, and a real big buck got up out of there and trotted and kind of looked over here like couldn't see me. And the wind was in my favor, so I just stood still and he just trotted off into there. And I set up in that ash tree right there. And right before dark, he came back and he was walking out to come underneath me. And there's a little buckthorn tree over there through the leaves. I don't know if there's a squirrel or it was thermals, probably the thermals. But all of a sudden he just bolted into the swamp, crashing off. So, but he was coming. But that's the trouble with them coming back when you bump them. They almost always find a way that they can check through there, whether it's the you ever set up on one you bumped, the best thing to do is go down to the first transition edge, you know, downwind. When they come, they'll come up that transition and smell to see if you're there. And I think that's the best way to see if a buck comes back and kill it. There's some really big rubs over here right behind me. They've been there a couple of years in a row. Here. Oh, that's good bark on the snow.
Look how tall that is right there on the right. Gee.
Looks like it's been here recently. Huh.
You might have hunted here at the
Off, huh?
might have hunted here at the right time, Dan. Imagine that.
Yeah, when I hunted here 2 weeks ago, if you watch that video, that buck was standing right in here. I saw the antlers move, and then I couldn't see it no more. And I turned around and gave up on it because it was so long, and then all of a sudden it came running out of here, but it was right here. I didn't hunt it this year, and there was marks on it, so it looks like somebody was in there. Big dead end I found right here, right up in the open.
There's a nice rub right here. It's this high.
Go. So this is the tree I got right here.
Hey Dan. Shed. Shed. A nice one, it feels like.
Yeah.
Taking that home.
That's the other side of the one I found.
I knew there was going to be one back here, that's why I started walking to the side.
Nice.
On video too.
Yeah, nice.
It was real frozen in there.
Oh, that's a good one.
Should we plant it there for the next group again? I'm just kidding. Sweet.
Let's get a, did you take a picture of it before you ran over?
Yeah, I took a video while I was walking up to it. If anyone wants to just grab it and check it out, I mean, you paid for the tour. Oh,
Was that one from this year or last year?
that's cool.
That's gonna be last year.
Right over here. We're in the transition. Yep. Here, still recording. Cool. Get one with me, Dan. Give me credit. Man.
Yep. I told you I was taking a picture and you handed it away. What the hell are you doing?
Give credit where credit is due.
And then you turn it so you can't see it.
Oh, yeah.
You had it right. There you go. All right.
Is that one of the big ones you were chasing this year then?
Oh, yeah.
Nice. And he got shot.
Beauty.
That one?
No.
No, that one's
still alive.
Awesome.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah. The rub line coming around the way where he just found that shed.
Yeah.
And that way I can cover everything. And the bedding is out in here, but a lot of the bedding has now shifted to over in this stuff over here. And it's coming onto the island on a little tiny, it's like a bubble point coming off the island over here. We can take a walk in there and just walk down and see if we see any of the beds. I don't know if there'll be bedding in there right now or not. There might be more on the island.
Bedding down there.
Oh, but earlier in the season they're bedding in here.
What you got there, guys?
It's little jambalaya. Food.
Necessary after a long day of walking.
Thank you guys for watching this video. It was really fun to put together, and it was awesome to learn from Dan and walk in his shoes literally as he goes through scouting some of his best areas in this whole property. As I said before and mentioned in the video, it's really important that you guys watch these full breakdowns that are coming out. You're going to see map examples. Basically what you're looking for when you're trying to select a new property. These examples aren't going to be these exact spots because I can't give away Dan's spots without retaining all my arms and legs. But they're going to be something very, very similar, so you guys can key in on that and make sure that the next property you decide to check out is one that's very similar to one Dan loves to hunt. Also, it's going to include all of those questions from the people that attended the workshop. This is crucial because everything that might have been racking in your mind that you can't get answered directly from Dan is probably going to be asked in this workshop, because these guys were pretty dang educated when it came to asking good questions. So stay tuned for those videos. If you have a question in the meantime, I can always shoot Dan a text or give him a call. Drop it in the comments and I'll see if I can get it answered for you. If not, just throw a like, subscribe if you like the content, and stay tuned for those future videos upcoming. I've got a couple of those breakdowns, and I've got breakdowns of what happened in my successful encounters this season, and some ice fishing if you're into that. Thanks, guys.